Good morning and welcome. Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason on this Thursday, 800-951-0592. That is our toll-free number. Hammer the dip, and the dip continues. We're just right above the support levels that I'm assuming we're going to be holding here at that 1950. That's just technical stuff. So, I'll say the sell-off has been orderly. It'll get disorderly if we don't hold it, but I'll tell you why. I was scrambling all morning this morning because I was trying to figure out this new term that popped up out of nowhere this morning. I'll tell you about it. And it turned out, you know what? Yeah, it's a bunch of clickbait. But again, when you want to move a market, this is how you do it. AllAmericanGold.com is the website. And Jason, we've seen the sell-off in gold started with the jobs report from last Friday. Continuing today, we got jobless claims number, and this is where it all started. So we had three things that happened all in, I don't know, I'll say a half hour, because some of it happened before I was leaving for work. Some of it happened while I was making that drive into work. But in about a half an hour time period, initial jobless claims. They're expecting 251,000. Jason and I were talking about this yesterday. Is it going to be higher? Is it going to be lower? It came in at 242,000. So we kind of shot up last week. They took it all back. Here's the problem. If you read the headline, you're like, oh, okay, well, it fell right. Maybe last week was an outlier. Well, come to find out, the state of Massachusetts, I don't know if they had a problem. They actually called it that they had some fraudulent numbers. It was kind of odd that they used the word fraudulent number. Well, I'm assuming they had a problem with an Excel spreadsheet. Who knows what? But they essentially said, hey, by the way, we're going to, reset that. We had some bad math, whatever it was. So they acted like they went 20,000 to the good. Without Massachusetts, the number would have been right where it was last week, which would have been considered a bad number. But okay, it happens. They had to come out and say, hey, we had to make an adjustment. We overstated jobless claims. Now we're correcting it. But again, you won't get that. Right, they don't report that in the media, right? They just like, oh, jobless claims were better, so that was the start. At the same time, we had the Dallas Federal Reserve Governor President come out, and she is a voting member, so you got to pay attention to what she has to say. And again, she's relatively new here. Lori Logan is her name. She is a voting member of the Federal Reserve, so she's one of the 9 votes. She came out today, right at the same time, and said that the data points so far that she is seeing do not justify skipping a rate hike in June. So that was the headline number. Then, of course, she said, but, we've got a lot more data to go. We're a month away. We're a month away from the next Fed meeting. So that got the dollar going, right? That got gold selling off even more. And then there was a headline on CNBC. And you just... sometimes you just got to turn this stuff off about a substitute rate hike, Jason. And, of course, it was on their pay site. So you got to pay for it. Yeah, I'm not paying for it. Right? It's the Internet, right? I've got ways of finding things out I need to find out. So, again, the headline is the Fed is going to use a substitute rate hike in the June meeting.
Yeah, and it's almost hard to understand what they're even saying by substitute rate hike. It just sounds like mumbo jumbo.
So I'm sitting there, I'm Googling substitute rate hike. I'm like, what? I've been doing this 20-some years. I've never heard of substitute rate hike. It was all a headline. All as they really said, ready for this? Well, the Fed's not going to raise rates, but they're going to talk tough. Hey, we're not lowering them either. So, again, some headline. And by that time, hey, listen, here's what I want to have happen. I want gold to get to 1950. It's right now, 1955, 1954. Touch 1950 will make me feel better, because that is where the technical level is. But I'll say this, and I've said it all along. Keep buying even if it breaks below about 1950, buy even more. Because here's the realities. I'm going to say that this may surprise some people. We had Austin Goolsbee, another new Fed member, by the way, huge liberal, Chicago Fed. He was out earlier in the week talking about, man, I was real close. I was this close to not voting for the rate hike at the last meeting. Now, he's another voter. So let's call him the Dove. And again, I understand his point. Right? Well, I get it. Boy, you're crushing banks. I mean, man, these aren't good things. Then the Dallas Fed says the exact, oh man, I haven't seen any data. We can keep hiking. Guess what? I understand her point as well. This is that box Jason and I keep telling you the Fed's in. They're damned if they do. They're damned if they don't. Patriot Radio News Hour. We'll be back after the break. 800-951-0592. Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason here. We had a economic data out today. You had people talking about, we're optimistic about the debt ceiling. That's a bunch of nonsense. Just so you know. The Wall Street hasn't moved in either direction about this debt ceiling thing. But anyway, any reason is a good reason, right? So we had Philly Fed manufacturing. It was negative. And then we had existing home sales March. So March is, that's the kickoff month for the spring selling season. Was down more than expected, down another 3.4%. Existing home sales down, 25% year over year. The rate, and I don't know how they get 25% because it's again, you can do anything with a number. We had existing home sales in the 6.5 million range. And now they're saying that this month it was down to 4.2 million annualized rate. Well, that's like a third, right? I don't know. I know I went to public school, but pretty close to a third. But hey, doesn't really matter. Probably not. And again, March is one of the best months for housing sales. So, but again, here's the other thing, Jason. Prices aren't down. Depends on where you live, I guess, right? Certain areas down, but overall, the theme in housing, sales have fallen dramatically, but prices have not.
Yeah, and the shortage in housing started in 2008, with the housing crash. And even though housing has caught up over the years, it never really caught all the way back up. So with the coronavirus, emergency coupled with the inflation that came in 2022, I think that's the only thing keeping the housing prices up. Because if they would have built back up to where they were pre, Great Recession, the housing price would be coming down big time. But and there is a supply situation there that kind of keeps the prices floating.
Well, here's what's interesting. So look at these numbers. So they didn't give us the average price. By the way, the average price would be much higher. But they did give the median price, $389,000 So that means you take the cheapest home sold. So let's just say, I don't know, you had a home sell somewhere, some dilapidated shack in a part of the country no one wants to be in, sells for $50,000. The house in Miami or Beverly Hills, wherever, sells for $50 million. And then you take the next cheapest and the next one, and you end up where, okay, half of the homes sold for less than this number, half the homes sold for more than this number. 389,000. That was down 1.7% year over year. That's it. 1.7%. However, it was the biggest annual drop going back to 2012, right? Because housing was still in the, recovering from the last housing crash. Total inventory, just over 1 million homes. So when you're saying, well, we're selling and on an annualized rate, a little over 4 million, we got 1 million. The inventory situation is better by 7% from last year. I'll tell you, here in Arizona, there's not a lot of inventory here. There just isn't, and everything that's a lot of what's out there is absolute junk. But if it's a nice house and it's priced right, it goes, and it goes quickly. Everything else just kinds of sits around there, Jason. But that's the numbers there. But again, let's go back to these two voting members: Goolsby in Chicago, Logan in Dallas. This is really the problem, isn't it? Because on the one hand, one Fed governor's going, man, I'm looking at this, right? And he's probably looking at financial conditions. He's looking at lending. He's probably looking at home sales, right? 4 million's a terrible number, by the way. That's just terrible. And the fact is, there was 4.2 in change, and it was March, which kind of tells me unless something changes, we may have existing home sales below 4 million. I don't even know. I'd have to look and see. I don't even know if home sales got that low during the crash. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. I'll check, just not today. He's probably looking at that going, man, Gus, we raise any more, man. How many more banks problems are we going to have? And then Logan, right? She's probably looking at, well, let's look at the number. I mean, the median, 389. What is the average? My guess, average was probably, maybe 425, 450, maybe a little higher, right? The average home price sale. She's probably going, well, you know what? Maybe she actually does the shopping for her family. I doubt it, but maybe she does. And she's like, man, prices are still hot. I mean, even the number, and we know, listen, these Fed governors, they know that they're not actually telling you the real inflation number. They have it. They have it. They just don't report it. Right? They give you the seasonally adjusted core this and that, but even their number was 4.9% last month, Jason, right? I mean, and their interest rate, they're only at between 5 and 5.25%. And we know, hey, it's 4.9%, wink, wink, nod, nod. It's actually a lot higher than that. And they're actually both right. On the one hand, we should not be raising. On the other hand, we should still be raising. And this is the problem.
Listen, you gave that number 1.7. Housing is down average. Once again, this is something that needs to be factored in, and that's the inflation, which I think people don't get this part. I don't understand it. Your housing is down about 10% easily. The inflation making the cost of everything around you go up, and your house goes down 1.7%, that's more like 11.7%, because the inflation is at least 10% year over year, Joe. So your house went down a lot. This is why I didn't think the housing prices would go down a lot. I keep saying I think the housing prices will go kind of sideways, maybe down a little bit, but that's a huge loss in value, because you are paying more for everything and your house is not keeping up. Your house, Joe, housing prices could go up 5%, and if the inflation continues to be real inflation, 10, 12%, you're not keeping up. It's costing you to live there. Renting's no more fun because the rents go up too, right? So Joe, this is a not a good situation. Housing is not doing well. It just looks better than it should because of inflation. Inflation makes everything just different. You have to look at it differently, Joe.
And I'll say this, I think that when hearing, California, New York, Illinois, every day the list gets a little bigger of states, cities, and counties that are running out of money. Even the forecast, what we forecasted for revenue in January, then we lowered it in March. Now we've lowered it again in May. It's like every 60 to 90 days they've got to lower their revenue. The deficits are getting bigger. I've got a bad feeling we're going to see taxes and all kinds, property taxes, sales taxes, you name, of course, they'll try to call it something else, right? A fee or a levy or something to that effect. Why do I have that sinking feeling that come the next election cycle, every county, city, state is going to be trying to force more taxes down on the consumer?
Yeah, that's one of the only things that local governments can do to try to shore up their accounts. And I vividly remember, I have a pretty long memory, but I remember the shows we were doing in 2019, Joe, which was all the pensions in the states you mentioned, New York, especially Chicago and Illinois, California. They were circling the drain. And then conveniently, here comes this pandemic. It just shows up out of nowhere, and then money. As of March 13th, 2020, President Trump declared an emergency, and the spigots was opened wide, and the money and suddenly the rest of 2020, 2021, nobody's talking about pension problems and shortfalls in money. And now here we're in 2023, and you're back to it, Joe, with banks failing, economic problems kind of back where it was in 2019. And they just bought us 4 years, I guess, Joe. Is that with all that money printing data, bought us a couple of years? Because here we are again.
And it's amazing. And I can cite California because they just released another revision. They had $100 billion surplus last year. Now they're like, man, we're going to get close to $100 billion shortfall in 1 year. That's how quickly these things can change. So it's really interesting. They're both right and they're both wrong. Whatever decision they make, it's almost like the wrong decision. Well, if we don't take the clickbait headline. It's the substitute rate hike, which is, okay, we're not hiking rate, but we're going to talk really tough. Right? We're going to talk real tough. Come on, man. Right? That doesn't work. And I think this is going to be the situation where I don't know which side is going to be right. Is Bubba Horowitz going to be right? And they're going to end up saying, to Jason's point, Jason thinks we're going to get reinflation. Remember disinflation? Where did that go? Right? You know what? It's like, let's just forget we ever said that. Right? Transitory inflation. Let's bury that. Time to bury that one. Jason thinks reinflation's coming. And you know what? Got a good chance it could be right. Where prices get hotter again. Which would then be where Bubba Horowitz is at. Hey, the Fed, even if they paused in June, they may have to hike in July. Well, it actually may be August, depending where the calendar falls. But they may have to hike again later.
And that's interesting, Joe, because I think CPI goes lower the next 2 months. And I think the July number, which comes out in August, I think there's a good chance the CPI goes up in August for the July number. Because that's when the inflation started going down the previous year. But I think there's a balancing, that 2-year thing that I keep watching. That's when it started to go down. So I think they're waiting I think the Fed is waiting for August for that July number to see if CPI bounces back up. Well, I think maybe that's what they're waiting for to make,
and
I guess, a really key decision.
Or is it, Morgan Stanley right? I want to say it was Morgan Stanley. I'll check it during the break. They just came out today and reiterated, hey, the Fed's going to cut in August. I mean, that's what okay. I don't know, right? I mean, what's going to happen here? And here's the thing. We've gotten this trashy data lately, right? That jobs number from last Friday, that was trash, right? Because they did the birth-death model, the second largest. Now, they've been doing this birth-death model for decades. But the second largest increase ever, the second largest number ever, 358,000 birth-death jobs. Those are fake jobs. Did they happen? Maybe. But can you prove it? Nope. And then today, jobless claims and continuing claims, Massachusetts comes out and says, well, we had this fraudulent thing, and we've got to reset everything. So we had jobless claims go to 242. If Massachusetts had been zero, hey, we had the same amount of layoffs this week as we did last week. We didn't have an increase. The headline number would have been 262,000. But they also went to continuing claims and said, well, we overstated that. So continuing claims went back to just below 1.8 million. Now we got to wait another week to see where this is at, right? So we're getting a lot of trash right now, confusing everybody.